بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. We left off in the book God's Emissaries talking about Nabi Lut alayhi salam and the deviations that they had in his society and how they came about. And at this point, the angels have come to Nabi Lut as guests and asked him to host them. But his wife would always betray him and go to the top of the roof and then signal to other people to come. And he told her not to do that. In this case, he's like, I know you do this, but don't do it, please. These people asked me to protect them. And the society said, stop protecting people. But he said, okay, if I leave them, they're going to be taken advantage of. And these people are really bad. So I feel in my duty to protect them and to keep them in my house for the night as they travel through. So she said, okay, I won't do this. I won't alert people. I won't do anything. And then she went up and did the same anyway. She sent the fire. She would light a fire on top of the roof and people would know that there was some guests in the house and then it would come approach. So seeing her signal, the people of Sodom, they came to their house as driven by their lower desires, their lust. They got to Lut's house, and Lut had just started preparing a meal for his guests when he heard a lot of people banging on the gate of his house. So he was like upset. He was wondering what's going on. And he understood that his wife had betrayed him again. He opened the gate hoping that, he would be able to keep the people from attacking him. So he told them, he said, these are my guests. They saw the people. He said, so don't disgrace me by harming them and fear Allah. So don't embarrass me. This is from Quran. So because culturally, guests are protected and respected due to the honor of the host. So due to the host prestige and position, they would honor those guests. So he's saying, because they are in my house, leave them be and don't disgrace me and my prestige or my honor, because you're harming them is disgracing me. So they told him, he said, didn't we tell you not to have these people, stop interfering with our affairs? So he knew that he wouldn't be able to hold them back this time. They were really aggressive. And in it's like a last move that he could do to keep these people from doing their haram actions. He said, these are my daughters are pure for you if you would only marry them. So he said, fear Allah and don't shame me by attacking my guests. Is there not among you someone with sense? This is from Quran, Surah Hud. If it was just to satisfy their lower desires, he offered his own daughters for them to marry. If anyone wanted to go back to the decency, and back to the traditional way, not the deviation that they had done where they would go men to men, women to women. So in the footnote, it talks about this, and he says that he wanted to give a last offer, an excuse basically, to remove all the excuses from them. By offering them, he says, oh, why don't you just marry, the women? There's women here, and marry a woman. He knew they weren't going to do it, but he's offering them. He's saying, there's no more excuses left for you to say, okay, there's no women, so we're going to do this thing, but he says, oh, take my daughters are here, you can marry them. But they didn't want that. They wanted to go and continue the way that Shaitan had taught them, and fulfilling their desires unlawfully. They said, we have no right to your daughters according to our customs, and you know what we really want. That's what they told him. This is from Surah Hud, ayat 79. Um, with great anguish in his voice, Lut exclaimed, half to himself, only if I had the strength to stop you, or could avail myself with some strong support. So it's like when you're outnumbered by a group of people and you say, like, I wish I had some supporters. I wish I could do something about this, but I feel overpowered. I wish I had some support. So he heard his guests from behind him tell Lut, they said, don't worry about it. Don't fear. We'll deliver you and your family, except for your wife. So Lut turned towards them, and he thought, oh, maybe they're just saying, like, they're confident, that bravado, that they can take on this crowd and do this, and that they are like an invincible and they're strong. And he told them, he said, obviously you're strangers to this place. You don't know what's going on. The four of them couldn't do anything to help themselves, much less about Lut and his daughters. He's like, you can't even take care of yourself. It's just four of you. How can you help us even? So they said, no, rather, we are the ones who brought you that revelation in which they have been in doubt about it. And we have brought the truth once again, and we are the truthful. And then they remove their face coverings and they say, Lut, we are Allah's messengers. They shall not reach you. They are the angels. And they were angels in human form. These were Lut's friends and helpers. So just as they brought him the truth before with revelation, once again, they brought the truth this time. And he was guaranteeing the punishment for these people and to save Lut and his daughters. And they said, quotes from Surah 27, Ayah 57, we have been sent to these criminal people to send upon them shards of sandstone, earmarked by Allah for those who are excessive. We sought to remove those in the city who were believers, but we found therein but one house of believers, and that is yours. So all the people in that town had turned to disbelief. Only the house of Lut was believers. So flee with your family sometime this night and bring up the rear, and let no one among you look back, and proceed wherever you are commanded to go. As for your people, their appointed time of destruction is this morning. Every last one of them will be destroyed by morning. Is morning not, so Allah says, is morning not very near? It's like something really close. As for your wife, what befalls them will also befall her, for Allah has deemed her to be among those who must remain. So we see that even though Nabi Lut is a prophet of God, gets revelation from God, his wife was still with those people. It was not enough. She didn't take advantage of such an excellent example as Lut, but she preferred to go her own way. Lut felt relieved after this. The angels had his support, and Allah had sent his help, and Allah had sent those angels to destroy these people, because for 30 years, he's dealing with these difficult people, and they're doing all of these terrible actions. And he says, by the morning, I'm going to be free from all of these people. So Jibreel told him, back away from the gate and let them come in. So Lut looked at his eyes for a moment, as hesitant about that. And then Jibreel said, we are your Lord's messengers. They won't reach you. So Lut let the gate swing open, and the people started, they had that lust in their eye, and they're looking at these four men. So a group of them rushed to advance on those four men, and it says Jibreel raised two fingers and with a sweeping movement blinded all of them. They stumbled away aimlessly, colliding with one another. They're bumping into each other, not knowing what is happening. And then their lust changed into anger, and they rushed out of the house, and they warned others they said Lut was doing magic. He put magic on them. So they told Lut that we'll come back in the morning. Neither you nor your guests will escape us then. So even after witnessing all these events that took place, They were so defiant to challenge Allah's messengers and carry on with those evil things that they wanted to do, that even though these people blinded them, it was obviously a miracle, and they knew it was something. They blamed it on magic. But even after that, they said, we'll be back. They were determined that they would come back and do those haram things and attack those men in the morning. So after they left, Lut locked the gate, and he turned and, addressed his guests. And they told him that you have to leave this city by the morning time. You have to get out of here. Allah's going to destroy this place. And he called his daughters and told them what was happening and told them they have to leave. So they started packing what they needed, and they were getting ready to leave and start a life somewhere else. So Lut's wife, Qewab, she couldn't be found. So she slipped out of the house when all that stuff was going on with that angry mob, and she went back to her own family. So Jibreel reminded Lut that don't worry about her. Allah has already deemed her of those people who will be included in that punishment. He prophesied to him that Allah would immortalize her as an example for those who reject faith. He would tell them she was under the care of our righteous servant Lut, yet she betrayed him, and so he could not benefit her or defend her against Allah at all. It will be said to her on the day of judgment, enter the fire along with the others. This is Surah 66, Ayat 10. So it shows that, just merely being the wife of a prophet is not enough to save the person. They have to benefit from their relationship with the prophet by implementing those teachings that they learn and following him and supporting him, being a good wife, as we see like examples in Sayyidah Khadija Kubra alayha salam, and her support and her being with the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And we see other wives of Prophet who later went against everything that he came to teach and fight against his successor and prevent his grandson from being buried near him by shooting arrows at the grandson of Rasulullah and many other things. So these people, they didn't benefit from the example that they had right there. And it's much more different than us. We're farther removed from. Imagine someone who's living in the house with a prophet, seeing everything, and then disobeying everything. They're seeing with their own eyes the example of the prophet. Whereas we are reading and learning, and we have not witnessed the prophet with our own eyes, only through Quran and narrations and things like this. So imagine how stubborn the wife of Lut would have to be to live with a messenger and to reject him and go against him. It says, early Wednesday morning before the sun rose, Lut and his daughters moved through the streets of Sodom for the last time. All around, they heard the people, they were drinking alcohol and all of these things and having these parties and haram things they were doing in these openly and publicly, which we discussed in the last class. They had no shame and doing haram with each other in the streets. So thankful that they would soon have to hear them no more, that they have relief now, that they'll be free from these people. They won't bother them anymore. So when the sun rose, they were on their way south to Hebron. Then they felt the tremors beneath their feet, and Lut knew that it had started. He reminded his daughters not to look back. So they marched on to their salvation and their freedom, and they left that place. They knew that the destruction was coming. There's a lesson in this that we should not look back when we are moving forward towards better things. When we are leaving behind this life, so for people who are doing haram, for example, and then they leave it, they do tawbah. We said tawbah is to turn. We are turning away from haram and we are redirecting ourselves towards halal. toward the Sirat al-Mustaqim. We're going in the right way. We should not turn back and look at, our past and look at the things we're leaving behind and want for those things. We shouldn't long for the past if the past was filled with haram. We just shouldn't say, oh, I remember the good old days when I used to do this and that. And we hear people, they reminisce and they talk about, oh, when I was younger, or when I was a child, or when I was in college, and I used to do this and do that, and all these things, and the parties, and for example, the girls or parties or eating, or someone who has left eating, haram, and they now are eating only halal. And it's, oh, I remember when I used to eat haram, how good these things were, and how this. And for example, if someone says things like this, they shouldn't do that, because these things were they were doing was displeasure of Allah. So we shouldn't look back and wish for those things. I remember I had a friend who's a convert, and he left, became a Muslim, and the people would come to him and say, oh, don't you miss how is eating pork, how does that taste, or how is drinking alcohol and going to party, like, don't you miss that, how is that, and I want to know experience, like, how's that feel, and stuff like that. It seemed like those Muslims that were dealing with, coming to him, were wanting what he left, whereas this brother didn't want anything to do with that, and he would be upset. It's like, why are you telling me these things? I don't want those things. I'm going towards, Islam, and I want to do what the Prophet says, and I'm ashamed that I even did those things in the past, and I don't want anything to do with it. We shouldn't look back and say, oh, the glory days, or whatever, how people do. So
I have a question or comment maybe. So
yeah.
nowadays there is a video going on the YouTube, and it shows the place in Jordan, at the border of the Jordan and Israel, that there is on a mountain, there's what do you call that? There's a stone monument, and they say that this is the stoned wife of Prophet Lut, because she looked back and she became stone, and they still have it. So I don't know if it's true or not, or
yeah, I don't know. I know they mentioned this in the Christianity. They say that she was turned into a pillar of salt because she looked back and she longed for that place. But here in this book, it mentions that she didn't go with Lut. See, in the biblical way, they say that she was with Lut, and they were all leaving as a family, Lut and his daughters. And then as they were leaving, she turned and looked back. And when she looked back, that's when she was changed into a pillar of salt. And she was chastised at that moment. But from this book and from the narrations, it said that she went back to her family, and she was with them in the house, and she just got destroyed along with other people. So I haven't seen anything. I know what you're talking about, but it's from like a biblical perspective. I haven't seen anything in our narrations.
These are all the Muslims who are showing that video. So I don't know.
I don't know. It doesn't say like specifically here how she was destroyed or whatever.
Not in the Quran.
It does say that.
The Quran also, it didn't say anything about.
No. Yeah. Okay. So maybe it's a big site that maybe the Christians would go see too. And
Okay.
I don't know. I haven't seen it. It doesn't specifically say.
If I find out, I'll forward it to you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, so it doesn't mention exactly how she was destroyed, like if it's in a different way than everyone else in this text. So it said there was an explosion near the city at sunrise, and the earth started heaving, and there was a big gale, which is mentioned in Quran, which rained down sandstone shards on them, which is found in Surah 54, ayat 34, and each of them was marked for the target, same like we see like in Surah Fil, when the birds came and dropped the stone on those people who tried to Abraha and those people who tried to destroy the Kaaba. It said the explosion, the gale, and the rain of shards overwhelmed the people of Sodom. Those who were caught out in the open were gruesomely pelted, with these sandstones, and their body was beaten and cut by these things raining down on them from the sky. So they took sanctuary in their homes and the buildings, and a moment later, subjected to even more harrowing experience. The four angels, those ones that came to help Nabi Lut, they had, having doffed their human forms for their angelic ones, spread their massive wings. Each one sank his wings into the ground on one side of the city, with their wingtips reached the furthest depths of the earth. Then they lifted in unison and raised the entire city into the air, so that the inhabitants of the heavens could hear the barking of its dogs and the crowing of its roosters. There they held it until Allah gave the word. Then they hurled it down into the sea to the west, and they buried it decisively. The overturned city formed a small island before it crumbled into the sea. So these angels lifted this city and just threw it down onto the earth, and they said that it was overturned, and it made a small island in that sea until eventually it crumbled down into the sea. And the giant hole that was left there, that had been Sodom, along with some ruins that the angels purposely left standing, would serve as a sign to all those who passed along that trade route for generations to come. The author of the book made an interesting footnote. He said, I'm tempted to speculate that the Sea of Galilee may be the result of their destruction. The fact that Jibreel told the Prophet that their city was located at Lake Tiberias, which seems to refer to the Sea of Galilee, along with this description of their city being wrenched out from its roots and cast into the sea, seems to allow for us to speculate that the Sea of Galilee is on the spot where Sodom once stood, because there's this big hole in the earth. And they said that now maybe the Sea of Galilee, the sea is on top of this hole where this city used to be, which is interesting. He said Jibreel would later recount the events of that fateful morning, which we find here mentioned in Quran, and actually Bahar Anwar. It says, before dawn broke, I received a message from the throne saying, Jibreel, Allah's order for the punishment of Lut's people is final and irrevocable. Therefore, go down to the city of Lut's people and the surrounding areas and uproot it down to the seventh layer of the earth. Then lift it to the sky, hold it there until Allah, the compeller's command, comes to overturn them upon themselves, but leave behind the house of Lut as a sign for passing caravans. We say that the punishment is final and irrevocable. When we see that this means it's final, there's no changing, there's no bada, nothing can come and change in this circumstance. Whereas when we look at the people of Yunus, alayhi salat, we see that the punishment was coming for them, but it wasn't irrevocable. It wasn't something that was final, but the punishment was coming. They all came and did tawbah, and then Allah averted that punishment from them, and something that seemed to be coming towards them was changed and pushed away, which we call bada. Something that happened, it seemed one way, but then something happened and changed to a different outcome. In case of Lut's people, it was not this way. It was they had gone so far that they had sealed the fate for themselves, and Lut gave them every excuse not to do what they were doing. Even offered his daughters, but they still persisted. Even they blinded them, the angels blinded them, they still persisted. He said, I descended upon the city of those criminals. This is Jibreel talking. I buried my right wing into the eastern border and my left wing into their western border. Then I ripped out the city to the seventh layer of the earth. I spared only Lut's house as a sign for caravans. Then I lifted them between my wings, held them suspended so that the angels in the skies could hear the crows of their roosters and the barks of their dogs. As the sun rose, I received a message from the throne saying, Jibreel now turned the city upon its inhabitants. I turned them upside down, all this after Allah rained down shards of sandstone upon them. Lut and his daughters, after this happened to them, the city was ripped out of the ground. They were turned and thrown down into the earth, into the sea. Then they made that small island. This city sunk down into the sea. And they say where this hole was, then possibly this could be where the Sea of Galilee is now. Then after this was, those people were destroyed, it said Lut and his daughters returned to Hebron, where they spent the rest of their days with Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, helping Ibrahim to do da'wah, to preach to those people, because they were on that place where all the caravans would go through. So they would teach them and spend their time doing that. On Ibrahim's suggestion, Lut married Lut's daughters off to 3 of those original people, the people who had immigrated with them to Hebron. When we read about Ibrahim, he was in the city of Kutha, and one tribe that followed Ibrahim, they all immigrated with him to Hebron. So he married, Lut married his daughters to people from that tribe. From the descendants of these 3 virtuous couples, because we said Lut had 3 daughters, they would come from their descendants, Prophet Ayub and Prophet Shu'aib, and another person named Balaam, son of Beor. We'll talk about them when we get to their place in this book, inshallah. So we see here that these people were persistent in sin, even when they had the chance, even when they had the opportunity to change. Everything was there for them to make the right decision, but they keep persisting and persisting in their sins. And as we see in Surah Furqan, that Allah says, have you not seen those who take their lower desires as their God? Will you be a protector over them? So we see these people definitely were those who took their lower desires as their God. And Allah destroyed them for these deviant acts that they were doing. So we see that when we look in the Quran and science of Quranic studies, we have Tadabbur fil Quran, for example, that we see the lessons in the Quran are given to us. These stories are not just stories, they're for us to take lessons from them. So, for example, we see what is the end of oppressive people, people who oppress other people. We see that they meet destruction, that their end is bad, that Allah sends his la'na on the dhalimeen. For example, he removes his mercy, he sends curse on those people who are oppressive. So we see that in Quran. So anyone who's oppressive, then this is their outcome. We see that Fir'aun, for example, he says that he is Allah. Na'udhu billah. What was the end of the person who says he is Allah? Or Nimrud, for example, says he is Allah. This was their ending, was bad. So someone else who comes and says that they are Allah, they should look for the similar ending. It will have a bad ending. So we see that every group of people had some sort of thing they were doing. Some people were cheating in their businesses, for example. We have Surah Mutaffifin, Surah 83, for example. It talks about these people who were cheating in their scales and weighing. So we know that anyone who does this will have this, the end that is mentioned there. So the people who are doing what Nabi Lut's people were doing, they're doing this haram and this following their lust and this deviant behavior that they had, and they are leaving their wives aside and going towards others of their same gender. What was their ending is what we have to ask ourselves. What came about from this? When we look at the ending that is mentioned in Quran, that this city was destroyed because they kept persisting in this act and attacked their guests and attacked those who came through and did many haram and deviant things. They were destroyed for those things. So the same thing comes, anyone who is doing these acts of the same people will meet the same ending. So Allah gives us these lessons of people who were destroyed, so we could look at them and say, why were they destroyed? What did they do? Okay, these people were doing the XYZ. Okay, I shouldn't do XYZ because I will meet the same way. It's a lesson for us, to benefit from. But Allah says, how many are those who, take the lesson? There's many lessons, and how many are those who ponder and think? And so we have to look at all of these things, and we have to be aware of the roots of these practices, because we see the same things that are mentioned in Quran and all of these stories. People are still doing these things today. Nothing is changed. Maybe the method is changing, or the way people are doing things are changed. But the problem a lot of that we're facing today is that many of these haram things that are mentioned in greater sins have become normalized in society. For example, drinking alcohol. It is seen as something normal in society that people drink alcohol, and no one frowns on it and no one looks bad on it. And the time has changed, over time. We see even in America during time of prohibition, they saw it as bad. They didn't want it. They got rid of it. Over time is got normal, and people do it. They normalize haram. The same thing, people doing drugs. We had a war on drugs, all these other things, and everyone looked at drugs as bad. But nowadays, drugs are legal in many places where before they weren't. We see that gambling, for example, is normalized. There's many casinos, many places that these things are looked at as something normal. Even we see in certain cities that prostitution is seen as something normal. It is legal. It is okay. We see that the acts that the people of Lut were doing now is normal. It is okay. And if you say anything against these things, people will come after you and say things against you, because they have normalized these things and spent a lot of money into normalizing these. So we have to teach our children that these things, even though they're prevalent in society and people are doing them, it doesn't mean that we think it's okay and that we do it. At the same time, we are respectful of people, and we don't swear at people. We don't treat people bad. We treat people good, and we give the best akhlaq and the best example. If we are rude and harsh and mean to people, they won't want anything to do with Islam. As Prophet said, Allah told the Prophet, if you were harsh-hearted with people, they would have scattered away from you. And we see that, we have narrations, for example, that if some imam says, if the killer of my father, the one who killed Imam Hussein alayhi salam, gave me his sword that he killed the imam with, as a trust, I would give it back to him. So we see that even the imams, they would treat even this person in this way. They would honor his trust. And Imam Rida alayhi salam says, do good to all people, whether they deserve it or not, because we are worthy of doing good. So we treat people with decent human rights, with humanity, and hopefully through our good behavior, people are attracted to Islam, and we can tell them, about Islam, and maybe they'll want to convert and leave those things that they were doing before. So even though we don't agree with these actions, we still are kind to people as human beings. So this is the thing that we have to keep in mind. But in our heart, we don't accept these things because it goes against Allah's will, Allah's religion. And when it goes against Allah's religion, we cannot accept it as something that's okay or something that's normal. And we have to inform our children about the proper way of Islam and the way of the Prophet, and anything that anyone else does, whether they do this, they don't follow our religion and they're doing other things, or even if they follow our religion and they're doing haram, we have to say, that is what those people are doing. But just because they are doing it doesn't make it right for us to do. So these are some the lessons that we see from this story of Nabi Lut alayhi salam. And inshallah, next class, we will go into talk about Prophet Yaqub and Yusuf alayhim assalam, Prophet Jacob and Joseph mentioned in English. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
So next week we don't have a class.
No, I'll
Sheikh will be traveling, so a week after that, inshallah, we'll resume the class again.
yeah, from Karbala, inshallah. I'll keep everything